Okay, so last section here, wrapping up today, construction, monitoring, and maintenance. We'll take some questions after construction, and then we'll get into monitoring and maintenance. I combined monitoring and maintenance. It's not combined in the book, but I combined it because ultimately we don't want to think of monitoring as something that happens after step B. Monitoring is something that once you've installed a project of any kind is on. And it's really done throughout the life of the project. So you don't hit a point you say, okay, we're done maintaining this project after 3 years, now we're going to monitor it. Oftentimes monitoring and maintenance go together. So for the purposes of this presentation, I put them together. Knowing that there's people from both the design and the contracting side of things in the room, I'll try to touch on it from both perspectives. If I don't do a good enough job on a certain topic, just let me know and we can get into it. I'll go through these relatively quick, and then I think it's probably a bit easier to have practical conversations about, real life examples. So the first couple things, these are general, as related to construction, general ideas that I consider, it's doing your homework, it's project management things, whether you're a contractor or designer, permits and approvals, understand what you need, know what they require, know what they allow. We did a small stream bank stabilization project one time, and it was like a GP4, general permit, really easy to get, but we couldn't work in the stream. It doesn't permit us to work in the stream. I knew that. I didn't communicate that to our contractor. So I went to lunch, and I came back, and there's a big hose sitting in the middle of the stream. Okay? If someone from the conservation district or DEP would have driven by, just, hey, I'm in the area, I'm going to stop by this project, we would have literally been up a creek with them. Okay, so not only if you're a designer and you're in charge of obtaining the permits, you're in charge of obtaining the approvals, just you knowing them is not enough. You need to make sure your contractor, your site foreman understand them too. The flip side of that is if you're a contractor or site foreman, if there's permitting related things that you're not familiar with, make sure you ask. Make sure you understand what you can do, because that's going to drive your construction sequence and your process. Timing, when are you putting something in? When we do stream restoration projects, best times to do that are in low flow periods of the year. Okay, so when we don't expect a lot of rain, that's the best time to work in the wet, when it's kind of wet. The flip side is if you're putting in a meadow, and the meadow is part of a construction project, and they said, okay, we're going to finish up construction in September or July, we want you to put the meadow in there. My first response is, well, we'll do temporary stabilization, I'll come back in the fall and do the meadow. Because the timing's not right. It's too dry, it's too hot, it's not a good time for seed germination. The same thing goes for planting any sort of containerized species. It's not a good time. It's going to cost the client money to keep it irrigated, or if I didn't bid it and I didn't include irrigation, they're going to come and they're going to lean on me, and I'm going to have to provide the irrigation. When if I have a conversation up front and I say, here's what I see with your construction sequence, here are my recommendations for timing on the implementation, what do you think? Our experience has been that if I provide a solution in the short term, they're okay with a long term, waiting a little bit longer, even if it's a month or 2 months. Okay, so understand the project, understand what it requires from a timing perspective, and make sure you consider that on both sides. Protect existing vegetation, soil conditions, prevent contamination. These are, again, site best management practices. We talked about them in the earlier section. If you're a contractor, make sure you got your spill kits, make sure you got your spillet, your sort of staging areas set up, make sure your construction entrances are installed. If you have to have any sort of other construction site BMPs implemented, make sure they're done appropriately. There's a reason they have to be there, and it's a good reason. It may be annoying to have to do them, but there's a reason they're there. And then the last one, soil testing. Keep coming back to this soil thing. If you're a designer, I like to have the soil tests done and make my own soil amendment specifications on the design, because then I know it's being done in the intent that I had when I designed it. If it's not there and you're the contractor and you're in charge of doing it, you need to find out what are the goals, for any sort of soil amendments, whether it's planting, whether it's a stormwater BMP, anything. What are the goals and what testing do you have, and do I need to get the testing done? Because ultimately, if it's not done, they're going to come back to the person who put it in first before they come back to the designer. So it's twofold. If you don't have the information you need and you're supposed to put it in, make sure you get the information you need. And if you're the person developing it, my preference is to always be in control of the design and make sure I'm in control of it from start to finish, because I want it to go in as I envisioned the project. So do your homework. Don't just say I'm going to leave it up to the next guy, because all that does, it opens up a heap of a mess for you later to have to fix things because they were interpreted wrong. Okay, process. Biggest thing, understand the critical path. What has to happen? You know, A has to happen for B to happen, for C to happen, for D to happen, for E. So understand what that is and get together between contractor and designer, chart it out, and make sure everybody's happy with it. The construction sequence ultimately, you know, is going to be an efficiency thing. You know, are we doing this project? A, are we implementing it in the correct manner? Are stormwater systems going in before we do all our other site work? But also, are we doing it efficiently? And a lot of times, we run into situations where we do things differently than what a lot of our excavators are used to in the Lancaster County area. So we have to sit down with them and say, look, I know you're used to your process is this. This is a process we need you to follow because the goals of this project require that, you know, all of your work within the floodplain is low ground pressure equipment. You can't just go in with the big D8 or something and tear it up, because you're going to compact the soil. They're not everyone's used to that. And we're always working with different excavators. So we have to sit down, and there has to be an open line of communication between us and between the people who are actually doing the work, so there aren't any problems in the long run. Understand site conditions. You know, if you're the designer, you should be going through the site analysis process, so you should have a good handle on what the different site constraints are. If you're working at it from the contracting side, you should be at least familiar with the site by the time you're getting out there to know, you know, so you don't show up with, you know, you need a track skid loader, but you show up with a skid loader that's got 4 wheels, and you spend half the day stuck because you didn't come check out, you know, you didn't realize, oh, we're working in an area that's typically very wet. And that's what the picture here on the bottom is. You know, it's just saying, know where you're working. It's going to save you a lot of time. And then vegetative establishment comes back to the timing of the project. Are you planting at the right time as a designer, or are you establishing clear planting windows? One thing we do with our seed mixes especially is we say, look, you can't plant after June 15th. And you can't seed until after September 15th, or, you know, until October 15th. You know, we set clear windows, and because we know from experience that these windows are effective times for growing. If I'm speccing it, I look at it like this. I'm speccing it, I should know what I'm speccing, I should know what's going to work. So it's my responsibility to convey that information to whoever's eventually going to implement the plan. And what you can sort of avoid is, well, we put the meadow in July, nothing happened. So our client got charged again to reseed the meadow. You know, that's reducing costs through sustainable design. And then consider establishment period. And the establishment period thing really comes into play with maintenance, but you know, is your client expecting something after one growing season? Because if they are, a warm season meadow is not your best option. That takes 3 years. Maybe you need to think about doing something that's more cool season based, or maybe it needs to be, instead of seed in the rain gardens, you need to just use containers, and you need to try to figure out how to work that into the project budget. And then lastly is equipment. You know, the big things here on equipment are, especially when it comes to sustainable construction methods, is maximizing your reach, minimizing your passes, minimize disturbance. Okay? Every time you have to move in a mini hoe, it takes time. And when you're moving around in a mini hoe, you're probably not moving dirt. And you're also running over soil and you're compacting it. Generally, if you can work from the edges, work from the edges. I always tell my contractors, when in doubt, stay out. Because if they take, you know, I've worked with guys who are like, you know what, this is a low ground pressure track skid loader. And we look it up and it's like, no, it's not. That's what you were told, but it's not. And if you go in the stormwater BMP, you're going to seal everything off. And it's not going to infiltrate. So, again, you know, it's understand I try to understand their process and how they're going to approach it. And even on small projects, pre-construction meeting, 1,000 square foot bioretention facility, we got together. I said, what are you coming in here with? You can't go in there. And he said, I'm glad you told me that because I was planning to go in there. And he brought a different piece of equipment, he worked from the edge. If you don't go through this process and the contractor comes in and you didn't communicate not to go in there, and this should also be in your specifications too. Nothing, you know, a lot of times you can sort of, you can utilize specs for septic system and installation because they're kind of similar, especially when infiltration is required. So a lot of times we'll just defer people to that. And one of the best contractors I've worked with in our area, all he does is septic systems. He's a pro at doing these stormwater BMPs because he understands the requirements are similar for both. But if you seal it off and you plant it, okay, you plant it with seed, all right, well, you know, you can always reseed. But if you put, you know, a couple hundred plugs in there, you either have to come pull them out and store them somewhere, or you just rip them out and you start over again. You rip the site, you add more soil back in, you get your infiltration going again, and then you replant it. So now we just did the project twice. Okay, all because there's no communication. And doing the project twice takes more fuel, it's more emissions, it's more time. So, you know, it's not just what we're installing, it's how we're installing it that we have to think about in terms of sustainability. Generally, less than 5 PSI, track skid loader, you're usually going to be able to run around most sites with that. Small BMPs, again, if you can stay out of them, stay out. You know, there's really, you put a 500 square foot rain garden in, there's no reason the contractor should be horsing around in there. I mean, they could barely turn around in a 500 square foot rain garden with a track skid loader. So, communicate. And be aware if you're not sure how to put it in, ask the person that designed it. If you're designing it and you're not really sure what the construction sequence is going to be of your contractor, just touch base. So that's construction. Anybody have any questions up to this point? Okay. All right, maintenance. This is the biggest, there's been a huge push recently in considering maintenance. And it's good. Because LEED and other Sustainable Site Initiative, everyone's pushing to put these naturalized landscapes in and all these meadows. And they're great, and they look great, but nobody's really sure what to do with them afterwards. You know, Ernst has been instrumental in bringing about, you know, the use of meadows and seed as a planting medium. But they've created these mixes and they've just basically turned everyone into an expert. I get an Ernst mix, I put it down. That's true. But what do you do after you put it down? So, like Kelly said, in the design process, that's when you start thinking about maintenance, before the project is installed. Okay? Sustainable landscapes, any kind of landscape is a dynamic system. I one time in the office with one of our director of installation, field operations, joked that it's not rocket science, it's just maintenance. And Jimmy said, actually, it's harder than rocket science because science operates in a vacuum, in a controlled environment. Nature's not controlled. You never know what you're going to get. You never know what's going to happen. We can spray a site 4 times, it's dead as a doornail, seed it, and I come back, it's full of mugwort. You know, you just don't know. So, because it's dynamic, maintenance is ongoing. It never ends. It reduces if it's done correctly, but it never ends. when you're setting up a maintenance plan, we've listed some of the things that you need to think about. Okay? Ideally, you put a landscape or a system in of some kind, and maintenance starts from day one. That doesn't always happen, but hopefully it does. And hopefully, by being there on day one, you know where it came from, what was put in, and you know what to expect. So it helps you anticipate what's potentially going to happen. You need to think about not just what's happening on your site, but you need to think about the surrounding sites. Okay, did I put in a meadow next to an ag field? Because if I did, I may have to contend with sort of typical agricultural weeds. Or did I put in the wetland meadow I'm putting in this week? We killed reed canary grass to get rid of the reed canary, but the neighbor didn't get on board with the project. So we're going to seed this whole area, and right next to it is reed canary. But I know that, and I know what to anticipate, and I know how to start trying to prevent the reed canary from coming down into our meadow. Okay, because I'm looking outside of just our site. Wildlife, deer, if you're putting shrubs and trees in, garlic sticks, I have a picture of one of those, is a great anti-herbivory device. They're cheap, you can get them in a big bag of 500, 1,000, and they clip onto a branch, and they have like a garlic oil in them. And I would say they've generally been pretty effective for us in keeping deer away, as an inexpensive way to do that.
Where can you get those?
A.M. Leonard carries them. Most landscape supply companies should be able to get them for you. I think I think you can get them from Amazon. You can get anything from Amazon.
Garlic stick.
Garlic stick, yeah. And I have a picture, so you'll be able to. I'll show you. I'll point it out when it pops up here. And then we just have a note here about integrated pest management. Integrated pest management isn't just pests, it's plants too, and it's a fancy way for invasive control. Okay? And what we do there, and we do it the same with any type of maintenance plan, is what are the goals? And the goals should be established when the project's developed. So we just take those and we say, okay, meadow, the goals are in the first 3 years, promote establishment of the native species and prevent encroachment from invasive species. It's simple. Now, trying to actually implement that is where it gets a little more complicated. Monitor and identify pests. Again, monitoring, it's constant. Once the project goes in, you're in monitoring mode. And parallel to that is maintenance. And then control. How are you controlling things? What are you doing? Is it mowing? Is it string trimming? Is it hand pulling? Is it spraying? There's no one size fits all type of approach to maintenance. You have to understand what you're treating to know the best way to treat that. So it takes a lot of education up front by whoever's doing the work or whoever's designing it. If I am planting a meadow and I know a client really wants a warm season grass meadow, but they don't want to spend a lot of money on maintenance, sometimes I won't even put wildflowers in it, okay? Because I'll seed it, I'll tell them it's going to take 3 years, and in the meantime, I'll just get them on, maybe 3 times a summer we'll come with a boom and we'll spray it with a broadleaf herbicide. All the broadleaves are gone. I know there's not supposed to be any broadleaf in there, so by hitting it with the broadleaf herbicide, it takes care of that, the grasses keep growing, okay? As their expectations change, or as maybe their willingness to spend more money when they see the project become successful changes, we can either go back and we can add wildflower seed in fall, we can plug it with wildflowers, or we can dial back the broadleaf herbicide application, just see what pops up. I guarantee if you kill off a site and add a meadow, you're going to get common milkweed. That plant just pops up everywhere. Hemp dogbane's another one that's going to pop up. Both natives, both great plants, look great. Dogbane's blooming, probably just got done blooming. Fleabane's another one. It looks like it's a little white aster looking plant. Those just pop up. So understanding what the native plants are that can be expected in a meadow is another way to sort of allow your maintenance plan to evolve. So we started out with all grass, and as the client's willingness and understanding to change and adapt with their meadow, as that changes, we can change our approach. and we can realize different results based on from what we actually installed. Monitoring, again, it's ongoing. It should be front and center with the maintenance plan. So when we give someone a contract to maintain a meadow, it includes not just time for us to send a crew out, it includes time for me to go out once a month. Sometimes I spend more time on the site than the crew does, but I have to know what's going on in this meadow in order to accurately direct these guys as to what to do. Okay? I can watch the thistle develop. I can know, all right, we have to hit the thistle in the next couple of weeks. Or I can see, all right, we missed the window on the thistle, we'll string trim it down, we'll attack it in fall. It's understanding these kinds of things and being, you don't have to be out there every week, but just being a regular visitor to the site and understanding how it's changing and understanding how it's evolving is as critical to the success of your maintenance and monitoring as it is to actually even be doing the work properly. And then the last note there, it should be adapted. So you can't make a plan and just assume, well, in 5 years this plan's going to hold true. By year 5, I'm just going to mow this meadow once a year. That may not be the case. In year 5, you may be out there once a month. In year 2, you may be mowing the meadow once a year. You don't know. We're not working in a vacuum. We're working in this dynamic system, and every site is different. And then general misconceptions, okay? There is a terrible rumor that native landscapes require no maintenance. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Not doing any maintenance on any landscape, be it native or non-native, is all it's going to get you is, as a client, is a bill for redoing it or not realizing your goals. And if you designed it, you're going to look bad because they're going to say, well, you said this was going to be this beautiful meadow. You said it's going to be this beautiful rain garden, and look at it, it's a weed patch. And if you're the contractor, you might be on the hook to redo it yourself. So what we usually find is that you've got these periods of time here, 1 to 3 years. That's a pretty good estimate on your initial establishment period, regardless of what the meadow is. Okay, if it's a floodplain meadow, a lot of cool season grasses, a lot of sedges, a lot of rushes, it's still going to take 1 to 3 years. You'll just see it kind of everything start to pop up sooner, but soft rush, Juncus effusive, needs to be in freezing conditions for 60 days in order to get it to germinate. Okay? If I seed it in the summer, Juncus isn't going to germinate until the following year if we've got consistently freezing temperatures for 60 days. It may take 2 years. We have a site where we knew we put Juncus in the seed mix and it didn't appear for 4 years, and now it's everywhere. You know, there's no way to monitor that other than to just be present on the site and know what you're looking at and know, because I don't know what to expect. Every day is a different day for a natural system. And then maintenance of green infrastructure and naturalized landscapes does require a higher level of skill and knowledge of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what you're planting than just putting a bunch of daylilies in a flower bed. That's not to say that you can't have people, you can't hire hourly people and direct them. It just means at some point in the process, somebody that knows what they're doing has to be present. An engineer or landscape architect or someone that designs a stormwater B&B, they need to understand how that thing works to be able to design it correctly and to be able to help whoever's in charge of maintaining it keep it functioning the way it should. So, higher level of skill doesn't mean you need to go to school for 8 years to put a meadow in. It just means you need to know what you're putting in and what you're requiring of the project. And I mean, for a lot of us, this is pretty standard fare. We're required to understand, to know what we're doing. It's just, you know, so.
I think there's a huge disconnect in when you leave off the project and someone else takes over the ownership and who they are.
Right.
And then their leadership into this inspection, maintenance, and what it's operated as. And they don't know it's a BMP. They may think it's a intended architectural aesthetic design, and they may at most not mow it.
Right.
But that's like one challenge, and then the other challenge. So sometimes it's a Department of Public Works person. Sometimes it's one person in the agency overall. Sometimes it's a landscape firm, or a
separate
mowing,
contractor.
and yeah, a contractor that he didn't be doing multiple sites or just doing it for a homeowners association.
Right.
And how do you have ways that you can sort of continue to sort of convey, but it's aesthetics and its purpose.
Yeah,
to
how do you
those
navigate
folks? Yeah.
that gap? Well, so first off, there's going to be situations where, as hard as you try, you're not going to get any buy-in on the maintenance. So all you can do as a designer or as whoever's putting it in is say, it requires maintenance. You need to maintain this. Okay, see this magazine picture that you had me design a seed mix to match what's in this picture. I did that. But you need to take care of it to realize that. So as long as you convey that, and they say no, sorry, not interested, then you did what you can do, okay? That's happened to us more times than we can count, okay? The second option is when we do a project, we'll oftentimes, I'll say, okay, we're gonna put a rain garden in, and the rain garden's gonna be seeded, and in addition to that, we're going to add a year of establishment oversight. That's in the contract, right from day one. And for a meadow, it's almost even more critical that happens. And we have a number of contracts that are 3-year contracts that we have started. We said, here's your quote for the meadow, here's your quote for maintenance.
Do you see any difference or time there where you have opportunities for signage, and whether or not it's a deterrent both from encouraging maintenance or someone to call, as well as when someone goes out to the mow? Typically still on the highways, this is a wildfire designated area. Do you put in signage? Is that only certain times? Does it make a difference? Because I know it's an additional expense.
We don't. I have a client we put in signage for. We put in a cool season meadow, and we put bulbs in. It was a hospital, okay? And we let the turf as a tall fescue. It grew up, and then in the spring the bulbs popped up. And right after the bulbs were like just done flowering, a guy from the township came in and mowed it. It's like scalped it. And he didn't realize it wasn't the township property. We put a sign up, as a response to that. We put a meadow in a residential community, and neighbors started calling. Weeds are too tall. They're not taking care of it. So, they got a letter from the police, ordinance violation. Fix it or you're going to be fined. Okay? So we kind of complied, and luckily we could mow the meadow and we didn't do any damage. But then we put signs up. And we were working with a group at the time that they actually took care of the signage for us. But regular communication with whoever's on site, I have found that to be the most valuable tool. With an HOA, you go to the president, you say, look, people are seeing things. Make it clear, this is our meadow. As a community, this is our meadow. Reach out to me if something looks fishy. And then the president comes to me and says, here's what they're seeing. And I can either respond and say, great, thanks for letting me know, we're going to take care of it. Or I can say, that's how it should be. Okay? And then with a place like if you're doing property management and there's just like a property manager or someone that takes care of facilities, just keeping an open dialogue with them. It really, maintenance, like anything, comes down to communication for successful maintenance. The projects we have the most problems on are typically the projects I have the most trouble getting regular communication between me and whoever's in charge of the property. And then the last thing in terms of bridging the gap is you can debate how successful it is, but as designers, a thorough operation and maintenance plan, which is now required if you're doing PCSM for MPDS or anything like that, a thorough, detailed version of that goes a long way. It at least it at least helps. And it allows you to open up the conversation. And for, land studies is design build, so we've got an advantage there. But, when I put together operation and maintenance plan, it's detailed information down to, why you're string trimming and why you're mowing and why you can't always use mowing when you need a string trim, but you can use string trimming as a mowing tactic. I mean, it's like detailed. And then I put together schedules. And they're estimated, and I say that. But it says year 1, 2, 3, naturalized BMP, whatever you want to call it on your plan, that gets this seed mix. Here's your likely, here are the most anticipated maintenance tasks you're going to have to take care of. So, and that's where you include things like after you get an inch or more of rain, you need to inspect the BMP, make sure nothing blew out, make sure there's nothing eroding. Twice a year, go in and mow it. Those types of things. So the more detailed you can be, the more likely you are to have a successful project post-construction, especially if you can't re-engage after it goes in.
Right, yeah, and I think that the opportunities are there on a municipal scale. That works real well if you can get that training level in. But it's these sort of decentralized homeowner association, people who have these on their property, they don't even know what they are. And one solution that we've seen in like North Carolina places is that the landscape, people who are out there doing mowing and planting and mulching are then becoming experts in maintaining green infrastructure so they can market themselves.
Right.
So it's like the homeowners don't have to, because they're going to hire someone to go out and mow the grass in the common areas too. So I don't know if you see an opportunity for you guys to do training to that type of group too, as well as like at the municipal level, to try to encourage the industry on that end to change from the ground up, so they don't just mow and they don't ignore.
We do, and we've tried. I just entered into a maintenance contract this year with a township just north of our office, and the plan is that land studies won't provide any actual physical labor on the ground. I will do the monitoring, generate work orders, and then I'm going to help their public works guys do the maintenance. And it's probably going to require me the first couple times we go out and say, look, that is a bad weed, that is a good one, that is a bad weed. But they want to take that on. And the problem you have with the training is if the group that's going to be doing the work is invested in it and isn't really interested in trying to understand it, you can train till you're blue in the face, and what good is it? But this group really wants to understand that. They really have an interest in it. They're in PA state game land territory in our area, so they're used to seeing these meadows and they want to do more of that type of work. The HOAs, it's like walking into a brick wall sometimes. And that's just the way it is.
I think with HOAs, what you're talking about is if the property changes hands
Well, not only
to
that,
someone else,
yeah, the
and then
combination.
how do you maintain that?
Right.
The contractors
That's a challenge.
are probably going to change every year.
Right.
I'm working with an HOA right now. They've got one group that's been there for years, and I exchanged information with their foreman, and we talk regularly. Even to the point that projects we didn't put in, he calls me and says, hey, I'm seeing this, not familiar with it, what do you think? We got a phone call the other day from a contractor that we've got a pretty good relationship with. They said, we'll put a project in, there's Japanese hops everywhere, what do you think? And so it's opening up lines of communication. I'm doing a meadow maintenance at a site. We're maintaining the meadow, Brickman's maintaining the grounds and doing the mowing, and ChemLawn or someone is handling turf management. And it's crazy. But day one of the growing season, I said, we're getting everybody together out on this site, and we're going to walk around, and we're going to draw lines in the sand. And I'm going to say, this is mine, and stay out. And maybe it's insensitive, but at the end of the day, if a homeowner comes up to someone weed whacking for Brickman and says, hey, what are you doing about that over there? They just hand them my card, and I get the phone call. And then I know things are being done correctly. Is it a pain? Yeah. I mean, it's taken a year to get the maintenance contract with this group. And now we're trying, and they got all new contractors this year. But I want the project to look good. The project is important, so you just have to keep plugging away until it works out. Communication, I mean, it's like everything I think can be solved through just open lines of communication. I have no interest in taking over the mowing responsibilities of Brickman. I have no interest in applying fertilizer for the lawn. And I make that known right off the bat. And once that's taken care of, we usually don't have any problems.
The only thing I can think of is I think that one of the benefits of incorporating these areas together is that you end up, once they're established, usually people will respect that, even if the property changes hands. Whereas if they're individualized and kind of piecemeal, you know, say you have a little rain garden here, a little fire retention area here, or something like that, it's a little harder to maintain, you know, that control because someone may have a different, you know, new homeowner or something comes in and they're like, oh, I don't want this, you know, and they'll just get rid of it. Whereas if it's incorporated in with like a riparian buffer in like a natural area in the back and it's kind of all tied together, it'll tend to, it's part of the landscape. Oh, that's part of the landscape. But it's tough, and there's townships that are really running into issues with it. There's a big conversation in townships that are really promoting these rain gardens, or you know, just like detention basins. Are they going to still have that value when it changes hands and stuff like that? So it's a conversation that's on
The other thing we started doing is with our maintenance plans, I'm just checking that time. We put a plan together. I put a plan together that calls out my responsibilities and contractor A's responsibilities. That way, if there's an issue, we can look at a plan together. We both have the same copy of the plan. You know, if we have multiple rain gardens, rain garden A, B, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3, whatever. If we've got a meadow that's, you know, chopped up into sections by trails, you know, it's meadow A, B, C, D. You know, anything you can do to remove any potential for miscommunication is always going to be helpful. You know, because the same site that I'm working with all these different contractors, they'll say they refer to the field as the location where the meadow, both the meadow is and these trails that we've established. So they'll call me and they'll say there's weeds in the field. In the meadow, or does the grass need mowed? You know, so we put a plan together, and now they call and they say trail needs mowed. The meadow has this on it. And now I know exactly what they're talking about, instead of getting out, driving out to the site to find out they need to call the guy that mows the grass. No. So anything you can do, again, detailed information to make lines of communication just across the board, client, contractor, designer, everything is going to make your life a lot easier, and it's going to make your maintenance more effective. All right, herbicide, pesticide application. I don't know where it is, but I'm just going to give the quick spiel here. Herbicide, pesticide should only be applied by someone that's licensed in Pennsylvania to do so. If you're doing it in a wetland, category 9, turf and ornamental grasses, I think, are 6 and 7. So make sure, if you're licensed, you're spraying within your means, and you're spraying in accordance with manufacturer recommendations. Okay, so that's this is, again, we keep it in our back pocket. We don't spray unless we have to, but the reality is sometimes we have to. So then it comes down to, what am I targeting? And that's where an understanding of the plant material comes into play. Okay? And with that is manual and mechanical techniques. So they all go together. Japanese knotweed. Okay? You want to hit that with a herbicide in the spring before it gets this tall. Right? If you string trim it, you're going to push it back down into the ground, and it's going to pop right back up everywhere else. You know, it's like whack-a-mole. It basically is what it becomes. So a lot of times the thought will be, okay, it's really tall, let's whack it down, and when it pushes, we'll spray it again. Well, it's going to push and it's going to spray. All right? And when it comes to invasive management, we don't want to make our jobs any more difficult than what it is. So timing and what you're using. Weed whackers are not going to work for knotweed. Glyphosate works, okay? It does. And if you do it at the right time, before it gets, 6 feet tall, you can do it in a relatively controlled manner. You don't have to worry about overspray. You don't have to worry, it's windy today and I'm going to spray this stuff above my head and it's going to go over into the neighbor's yard or it's going to go somewhere else. If you hit it at the right time, it makes your life easier. You'll probably use less material and it'll be more effective because you can be more targeted. So that's a situation where we have to use herbicide, but we're going to take measures to be as targeted as possible with what we're using so we don't have to use a lot. Once it gets tall, there's different methods you can use. They make wicks that you basically paint the stems with. It takes a little bit longer, but we can't always hit things at the perfect time. Lesser celandine, it's a little tiny ground cover, shows up in wetlands. First thing to turn yellow in the spring. Okay? Once it flowers, it goes dormant. So there's no point in spraying. So you got to figure out how to hit this stuff before it flowers. It also starts to flower before the snow's melted, and usually before it's above 55 degrees, which is when you don't want to spray before it's 55 degrees. So if you go out and it flowers and then you spray it, you're probably not going to do anything. Unfortunately, lesser celandine, you want to pull that. You want to do something to remove it mechanically because spraying is oftentimes the spray windows don't line up with one of the best times to do that. Annual weeds, especially grasses. Foxtail is a regular nuisance grass that we have to deal with. It looks great when it flowers, then it creates an enormous mat and it prohibits germination. It grows, it'll sprout voraciously. String trimming, most effective way to handle it. When you see it starting to pop up, string trim it. A couple weeks later, string trim it. A couple weeks later, string trim it. Eventually it goes away. It's an annual, so if you can keep it from going to seed and it doesn't put seeds down, you're probably not going to have an issue with it next year. Or you'll greatly reduce the issues you have with it. But again, we're looking at timing and we're looking at methods of reproduction for the plant and then developing how we're going to go after this thing. You can spray it all you want, but if it goes to seed and it drops millions of seeds everywhere, you're spraying it again the following year. But if you prevent it from going to seed, you're in good shape. Another thing to do with annual grasses, we're doing it in the detention basin. Fall panic grass, annual weed. Basin's too big, our budget doesn't allow us to get rid of it, so we're just going to let it burn itself out. We seeded it with a native mix. It's starting to pop up, and as the native stuff takes hold and spreads out, it's reducing the impact of the fall panic grass. The fall panic grass is an annual, and we're just seeing less and less of it every year. It's probably going to take another 5 years till it's all gone, but it's not costing the client anything. We're just managing some thistle and crown vetch really in that site. So you have to know, and again, this is where the skill thing comes in. What am I targeting? What's present? What are my expectations? And this is when just doing your homework and understanding the types of things you can expect are going to play a really important role in developing effective maintenance plans. So here's a couple. I got some pictures here that kind of generally show before and after pictures. This is a stormwater swale. I think it's about 40 feet wide. It's a big parabolic swale in a development. There's houses everywhere, and we seeded it, and then there wasn't a whole lot of maintenance follow-up, and you can see what it looks like. Okay, this brown plant is Biden's aristosa. It's a native plant, and in the right conditions, it gets about 7 feet tall. Okay, so what probably needed to happen, this was taken in the fall, early fall, you've got red maples here starting to turn colors. It should have been mowed. Number one, mow it. Because more than anything, this just looks bad. It's a native plant. It's fine. We put it in the seed mix. It just looks bad. But there's no maintenance plan in place to address this. So we went in, and this picture right here is taken from basically the same location. And we just implemented a maintenance practice, mowed it, took care of invasives, took care of managing broadleafs, and the difference is, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, this picture was taken at the right time too, but you know, you can see in there. And this is another picture here, same location, a little bit down slope from it. You know, this Biden's here, this is a walking trail. No one wants to walk next to grass that's that tall. This is a safe place. You can leave your door unlocked and leave for a week and probably nothing will happen. But still, it's uncomfortable. So, and since this project has happened, we've changed our approach to our seed mixes, and we use a cultivar of Biden's that only gets about 4 feet tall. Okay, so it's a learning experience, you know, and we took from it. And since then, you know, I think this here is some of the Bidens in some drier locations. It doesn't get as tall, but in those wet spots it just got really tall. Infrastructure, it's there for a reason. It's critical to the function of whatever BMP you're putting in. As such, it needs to be cared for. This was not an attentional orifice put on the inlet. Okay, this is what it should look like. So, you know, and right here, this is what it should look like. So those things, not just weeds, have to be addressed. Any sort of infrastructure that's present has to be addressed. And that's where your O&M plans are going to be really critical, because you're spelling out, look, don't just keep the flowers looking good. You need to keep all the other stuff that cost you a lot of money to put in functioning. Right? It's expensive to replace a pipe, you know, that fills up. It's expensive to hog out a pipe that fills up. So keep your outfalls clear. Here's another example. This is a rain garden out near Harrisburg. It's in the street. They put these little sediment traps in, and then they notched it to allow water to go through and hopefully drop some sediment. You know, we can argue all day about whether or not it was a good design, but it was built this way, and these clogged up. So what do we have in the middle of a relatively urban area with a lot of people? Standing water. And it's under asphalt's underneath it. So there's no biological activity, and of course people were crowing about mosquitoes. And they probably had every right to. Okay? So even little things like this, you know, if you're going to spec it as a designer, make sure you have some sort of system in place to recommend when it needs to be cleaned out and call out that it needs to be monitored. And if you're in charge of taking care of this rain garden, these should be cleaned out. Okay?
Is that just that's in Level 1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that just a poor design? I get drive by there all the time, I don't think so. But would you then, if you had to re-engineer this, would you kind of put, instead of that being a blocked pathway or weird, almost like a weird, could you do permeable pavement? Some way to keep the water, even if it pools, like from a design perspective, are there ways around that?
Yeah, and again, I think this comes down to sort of like a design philosophy. If it were me, I would eliminate this structure,
right,
sump it, make a hole, an actual rain garden in there, right, plant around the edges, and expect sedimentation to occur in the deepest part, right, and then I can send my maintenance crew in and dig it out. And that would
I don't get that little free. Right? That's just going to be a trap for any kind of road trash. It's going to block up.
Right. And, I mean, they cleared these out, and I think they were like a pack of cigarette butts.
Right. I don't get with that whole little inlet.
This is another example too. You know, I think what was probably more appropriate in this situation is if it can't be absorbed, just let it keep going.
Right.
I mean, we're trying. You know, this is essentially trying to make this a stormwater control device with a little forebed. It's not. It's a water quality device. So it's going to keep going unless this isn't built to manage a 25, 50, 100-year storm.
Yeah, that's naturally slow to go down.
Right. It's on a hill. So capture what you can. Let the rest keep going. Wildlife management, here's the garlic stick, right here. It's about the size of a pen cap. Yeah, and it comes with, well, I'll tell you this, if you order them, make sure you keep them outside. Okay? Highly concentrated garlic oil in there. Your hands are going to stink for days after you put them on. But yeah, I think these things work out to be 2 cents a piece. And if you're doing a reforestation project, they shouldn't be effective, but they are. You know, you got a big tree, put 3 or 4 on. You got a little shrub, put 1 on. They come with a little applicator right here. There's a hole here and a hole here, and then this top is open. And you stick your applicator in here, you pop a seal, and it just, I mean, you're not going to have any issues with vampires, that's for sure.
Are they biodegradable, photodegradable, or do you have to take them off?
We've never taken them off. They're probably not biodegradable. I'm sure the package is going to say biodegradable. You know, biodegradable, fine print after 100 years. So you can spray. I mean, we've been at golf courses and they do a lot of spraying, so they don't have to put any sort of garlic sticks on. That spray just smells terrible. Anyone that's familiar with any of that anti-deer spray, it's awful smelling stuff. And even after you spray it, it's just bad. And it tends to leave a white residue on everything. So we found the garlic sticks to be effective. You know, obviously that's a concern. They do fall off. You know, whether, you know, buck might, I mean, they don't stop all deer, so a lot of times we'll see a buck will rub a maple or something, or cedar, and knock it off or something like that. But they're effective, so it's a balance. You know, we can't, if they can make those things out of paper and not fall apart in the rain, that'd be great, but we need it to last 6 months. So this is probably the only way to do that. For some of our clients, we take them off. We use them at Church Kelly showed you with the amphitheater. We take them off and we put them back on. We have a regular maintenance schedule with them. So usually when we're taking the old ones off, we're putting new ones on. If you do a big reforestation project, you know, if you're able to go in and take them off and replace them, all the better, because it keeps, you know, they're only good for a growing season, really. So, and then this is some anti-waterfowl. Canada geese, not native, nuisance. We put a floodplain restoration project in, and we got about 100 feet downstream, and we were plugging it, just plugging away, putting, you know, plugs in, and they were falling up behind us, pulling them out. You know, we went back the next day, and hundreds of plugs were just laying on the ground. So,
do you have any design strategies? Because I tell people, stop mowing to your ponds or your wetland areas to keep the geese down, because the predatory nature of the geese will stay away.
yeah.
So I have some people who I know have just put in like these moguls, so it prevents the mower because it's difficult to mow. You know, like if you put these large things, depending on the type of mower they're using, but are there any kind of design strategies, just like you were talking about, in neighborhoods, the more contiguous you are with your features, the less likely that people will either completely destroy what you have in place, but is there ways to, like, for geese, is a huge issue here?
Well, yeah, the best way and the cheapest way is not to mow. The issue we had at that project that they were pulling the plugs out was, as they harvested sod from the fairways, and then we excavated the floodplain, and we built up the fairways with the excavated material from the floodplain, and then we took the sod they harvested from the fairways and put it on the floodplain instead of seeding. So when we put it on, it was that fine fescue. I mean, it was beautiful floodplain fairway. You know, you could have hit a 3-iron off of that like it was nobody's business. But it was short, and the geese were like, "Oh, it's great." There's all these like perfectly placed, you know, little snacks everywhere. So, but areas that grew up a little bit taller, they didn't go in, because geese do not like tall grass. Hate it. So that's the best strategy. And the other strategy is, this is kind of an extreme example with this netting. And I don't have a picture of it, but we're having issues with geese at another floodplain restoration project, and we drove stakes in, and you take cable, black cable across, and you make this grid, like 10 by 10 grids. So they stay out. It's perfect. You know, but it's not a cheap method. If you can keep vegetation a little bit higher, that's your number one way to keep geese out. Ducks, it won't keep ducks out. They love the tall grass. We implemented a bunch of no-mow areas along the creek and liddits, and if you've been to liddits, if you're familiar with liddits, we have ducks everywhere. And they all nest in the tall grass. The
Doesn't
benefit,
sound nearly as bad as the geese.
no. The benefit was, we planted, we put a bunch of native flower beds in right along this pathway. They stayed in the grass and they stopped picking at our wildflowers every day. So we kind of drew them away. So,
About plywood cutouts, German Shepherd cutouts.
yeah, I've seen them. Unless you follow up occasionally with the real thing, they figure out that they're fake.
That's scarecrows.
Yeah, I mean, waterfowl, anyone that's a hunter knows waterfowl are smart animals. And if those things don't move around, those cutouts don't move around, they figure it out. You know, we're going through this at another site, and they said, there's nothing you can do about geese. We put those cutouts in there, and it didn't work. And we said, well, did you move them around? They're like, no, they were in for like 2 years, and they never did anything. And we know the geese figured out that they were fake. And sure enough, they took a picture of a goose, like, pecking at the cardboard cutout. So I've heard out, you know, on the West Coast, people are training some of their waterfowl dogs to go chase them off parks. I guess that's worked with varying success. I suspect all it does is it pushes them down to the next park that there aren't any dogs at. But, you know, like stormwater used to be, it's your neighbor's problem now. So,
One of the biggest issues we have in Lidditz with the waterfowl is people feeding them.
Right.
So that's really what kind of starts it, that's what ends up being, when they become residents, and, you know, that's a battle when, because of, you know, people like having them around and like feeding them, and it becomes an issue.
I do know geese don't like, they tend to stay away from wildflowers, and they tend to stay away from rushes. Yeah, just rushes. Because a rush is like it's kind of spiny, it's a stiffer, you know, whereas sedges, they'll pound those things. You know, it's like lettuce. So that might be a strategy, just like we use deer-resistant plant material. You know, if you know you're going to have goose issues, change your land management strategies, and if you can incorporate some of the things they don't go after, do that. Because if you plant a bunch of tussock sedge, say goodbye. Here's same hospital site again, loaded with invasives. This one, we considered a management strategy, and we decided, you know what, it's just too bad. I need to start this meadow over in a condition that I can better anticipate what's going to happen. And this is last year. And I use this picture. The backside of this meadow over here in this area behind the building, it's actually fuller and it's a lot more, it's filled in a lot better. But I like this picture because I took this right after we came in and we did some string trimming of mare's tail. And mare's tail is a pretty common agricultural weed. It's generally harmless. If there's no real strong reason to get rid of it, we don't always get rid of it. But what it does do is it gets tall and it tends to shade things out. This meadow is in its second year of establishment, and you can't see them, but there's little sprouts of blue stem all throughout these bare areas, and they're about this tall. So I want to try to encourage as much sunlight to hit the soil and encourage those to grow as possible. So that sort of forced our hand, and we went in to get rid of the taller stuff and get more sunlight in there to help these bare areas fill in. So that, you know, this is an example. I'd love for it to look like the backside of this meadow, but you know, same site, very different results. A couple hundred feet away from each other.
Andy, when you string cut that, you actually just leave it in place, or do you actually try to get it out of it?
Yeah, you can kind of see. I don't know if you can see it or not. There's a lot of like dark. You know, it died out and turned brown. String trimming. You know, we don't take it to the ground. I take it about a foot high. I tell the guys boot height, cut it. What that does is, you know, inevitably our guys are pretty good. We've got them trained pretty good. They're going to hit stuff they shouldn't. You know, I can't expect that everyone on the crew knows what milkweed looks like when it's this tall. You know, I can't. Bidens that I talked about, and there's some Coreopsis species that look almost identical to mugwort. And sometimes they get me. Sometimes I got to take a picture and go back into the office and bounce it off a couple people. So if we string trim at a boot height, 8 to 12 inches, a lot of times those later flowering species will still flower. Right? With the grasses and the perennial species, as they get taller, the lower you cut them, the more risk you run. But if you take a couple inches off of something that's, you know, Rudbeckia, if it's 15 inches tall and you take 3 inches off of it, I guarantee the flowers still. Unless you do it right before. You know, if it's got a flower on top ready to pop, it's not going to flower. We use that strategy. We planted Rudbeckia triloba, split leaf Rudbeckia, beautiful plant, only supposed to be about 4 feet tall. Planted it in a site that we knew the site conditions were good. Turned out they were great. It grew to 8 feet tall. And this was supposed to be a meadow that people were supposed to walk around in a by a grocery store. So come July here, we'll string trim it it'll get about 6 feet tall. We'll take it down to 2 feet, and then it'll flower at about 3 feet, 4 feet. So the only time you don't want to leave anything lay is if it goes to seed. You know, if we whack a bunch of thistle down and it's got seed on top, you just made your life a lot harder. So you want to be mindful of that, and depending on what you're doing, you know, you may even want to bag it and remove it by hand. Get it in a plastic garbage bag, let it heat up, really burn it out, dry it out so it's not viable anymore, and then get rid of it at, you know, somewhere that's appropriate to do so. We do that with foxtail. If I have a little bit of foxtail and I can't get to it, or it's mixed in with too many things, let it go to seed. I'll send the guys out. They hate it, but I'll send the guys out to clip seed heads, bag seed heads. It's an extreme example, you know, and the projects we do it on are very, very small. So I'm not sending them to a 10-acre meadow to clip seed heads. You know, we're sending them to a 1/4-acre meadow. And we generally have the foxtail under control there. We do the same thing with reed canary. We'll just clip the seed heads. I mean, it still spreads by rhizomes, but it can spread by seed too. So clip the seed heads, collect them, take them somewhere, and then later we'll either string trim the reed canary or we'll spray them. Anyone have anything else? I think we're really ready. So,
You in your maintenance plans and programs, you manual is an even word. Mechanical is great. Most of my DPW clients, as long as it can be done with an engine,
yeah.
it gets done. But if it's manual, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, we just had it up on the Salmon River, the mayor called me back in and said, the DPW guys was brand new, spring of the year, and said, hey, you gotta come up, this place is a mess. I said, wait, we just had a legislative tour in the fall, and it was immaculate, you know, so how did it get that bad from fall to spring? Well, this guy was so new, he wasn't from the area, he doesn't remember the site when it had tires and car parts and bed springs, and, you know, we cleaned up this whole riverbank, and he thought that, you know, these weeds were just out of control. Well, you know, honestly, I walked through with him and the mayor, and as I was walking, I was just pulling weeds for about an hour. I pulled thousands of weeds. It wasn't difficult. It was just, you kind of bend over, grab the weed, and pull it. You know, I was kind of being, you know, it was just, you just have to pull some weeds, guys.
Yeah, I prefer to stay away from hand pulling because people just freak out. I sent our crew out, like the same job, I sent them out to cut seed heads, I sent them out to hand pull weeds, and they were like, are you insane? You know, like, what are you doing here? I was like, you're getting paid, we're getting paid, shut up and do it.
Yeah.
But it's not, string trimming is effective because if you knock it back and you keep on it, you can usually get away with like 4-week intervals, 5-week intervals, keep it from going to seed, and you can cover a lot of area. The reality is,
it'll die out.
yeah,
Keep whacking.
stopping to pull a weed out of the ground, especially, you know, if it gets dry, the dry summer months, I mean, that's like prime, it's prime for warm season grasses and it's prime for weeds. So it's tough to pull a weed, you know, and you go pull it.
Whacking it, you gotta pull it, you're not getting it.
Yeah, you pull a dandelion, you better get this much root, or you didn't get any root.
Right.
So, string trimming is like, one thing it does, it knocks it down and it gets it out of sight. If it resprouts, it gives me the opportunity to send a crew back with a herbicide pack, and instead of spraying like this at something that's 3 feet high, they're spraying down here, and much more targeted. That way, if there's a bunch of wildflowers around it, we can at least be relatively sure that we're not drenching a bunch of wildflowers. So it allows us to be a little bit more targeted. And then the annual weeds, a lot of times with regular string trimming, they won't even come back. This site, when we put we handle the whole property management, maintenance for all this whole site. As soon as we put the meadow in, the first year, I kept it string trimmed at 6 inches. I didn't let anything get taller than 6 inches. The warm season grasses won't. The forbs that we planted, the wildflowers, if you keep them string trimmed at a consistent height, they'll flower. I mean, people were shocked. They didn't think Rudbeckia was that short. They never thought black-eyed Susan would bloom at 6 inches. It did. Then the following year, we let it grow a little taller. And now we're not managing it all. And this is the 3rd year. It looks great. This is an example of when we started right off the bat. We got the right management in place, and now it looks great. So we basically spray broadleaf on mugwort, ground vetch, and a couple other things, and then we'll mow it in the fall.
That's a good management strategy, because if you pass it off the next year, I can tell where you whacked it and let it come back, and I know that wanting to stay there.
Right. And it encourages sunlight. 2 critical things for seed germination: sunlight and moisture. And when it really plays an excellent role is in the spring, when things are starting to thaw out. The sooner I can get sunlight on the soil, the sooner it warms up, the sooner things start popping. And I know the warm seasons aren't going to pop until end of May at the earliest. So odds are, whatever's coming up in early March, late March, early April, I can spray it. Or I can keep it whacked down. And you got to watch your wildflowers, because they'll start popping up. But even a lot of our natives, late April till I start really seeing those.